met.
All right, so we're opening and then continuing it. We're going to continue July 24th meeting. Some better drawings for elevation from the RMS bank. Because I couldn't understand anything about that in place. Shorter zoning.
Hopefully everything's spelled right. They didn't have to retype it. I move out of your way, right? You're where you want to be. Okay. Yeah, there you go. I'm all right.
We're ready to get started or have a forum? You have to get started or did you?
Yep. We did. Thank you.
We will call to order the Tuesday, June 26, 2012 Gardner Planning Commission. Everybody will please rise and join Commissioner Copeland in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner Copeland. Commissioner Roberts will please lead us in the roll call.
Roberts here.
Pop here. Manley here.
Burnett here.
Copeland here.
And there is a quorum present. Our first item this evening is the consent agenda, the standing approval of the minutes as written for the meeting on May 22nd, 2012. Those were sent out to the commissioners earlier this week. Has everybody had a chance to review them? Okay. There's no additions or corrections. Then they are approved as submitted. We have 4 items under old business. 3 of those 4, it looks like we will discuss continuing them, but let's start with number 1, is Z12-01, Colonies Real Estate Development. Is there a staff presentation or staff overview? Was there any introductions you wanted to do?
Oh, yes, thank you. Let me start by introducing Dave Nopik. He's been working with us on the landscaping standards and regulations, the amendments to those, and he is also now contracted to assist as needed with planning for the city.
Thank you.
I knew I did it, but I couldn't find it. Maybe I just thought I did it. Sorry, Amy.
That's okay. Okay, so this property, which is outlined in green on the screen before you, the existing zoning is C2, which is the general business district. The proposed rezoning would take that to CP1, which is the planned central business district. On the aerial view of the site, you can see the 2 existing buildings with their parking lots, and the preliminary development plan will show a new building to be located on the vacant lot to the west end of the property. And here is the preliminary development plan showing the new bank building with the drive-through. Preliminary elevations for the bank have been submitted as well. Those will be evaluated in more detail at the final development plan, but do appear to generally meet the architectural design requirements. One of the reasons that the applicant requested a plan zoning change is so that shared parking can be allowed. There are 65 existing spaces on the property, and there would be 11 new, which would give us a total of 76 spaces. Between the three buildings, that would exceed minimum requirements, but it would be difficult to have those, they're not spaced correctly for the buildings, the allocation. So the shared parking would allow people to park in anywhere on the property for any of those businesses. The new parking lot, as shown, that there are new spaces that would not meet parking lot setback requirements. 15 feet is required for the parking lot setback from a right-of-way. Only 3 feet is provided on the preliminary development plan. Staff is suggesting removing 2 or 3 parking spaces on each side of the driveway so that those setbacks can be met, since there are extra spaces for the site as a whole. The landscaping plan does not meet minimum requirements as it's currently shown. It does appear that there's ample room to add trees to meet requirements, and this is typically analyzed in more detail at the final development plan. Kind of skipping through the rest of the staff report, but we are recommending a continuance to the July 24th, 2012 meeting due to some outstanding issues that need to be resolved, particularly with regards to stormwater. So if you have any questions for staff before we move on, I know the applicant is present as well.
I noticed on the elevations, there was something about a marketing board on each side of those elevations. Is that considered a sign? Or how are we going to treat those?
We'll look at that again more at the final development plan. As far as the elevations go, those would most likely be considered signs and subject to our sign regulations. But I'm not sure if the new regulations will be in place at that time or not. So.
Okay.
Are there any additional questions for staff at this time? If not, does the applicant have a presentation or would like to make any comments regarding the application? If not, we will open the public hearing at this time. If there's anybody in the public that would like to speak on this application, if you please come up to the microphone, state your name, address. At this time, we're not seeing anybody from the public wanting to speak regarding this item. Is there a motion to continue public hearing, to close it?
Mr. Chair, I move we continue Z1201 to the July 24th Planning Commission meeting. Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Pop and seconded by Commissioner Manley to continue the public hearing for Z12-01 to the 7/24 Planning Commission meeting. Is there any discussion? Not all in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. We will continue that item. Our next item is the amendments to Chapter 18, Period 170, Signs. We will also conduct a public hearing to consider the amendments to Chapter 18, Period 170, Signs of Title 18 Zoning Regulations.
I do not actually have a presentation for this one. This is one you're familiar with because we've been working on it for a while. We do have a new draft of the text with changes highlighted from the previous version you had in March. I did not have time to finish the revisions to the tables, which are part of the regulations, so the amendments are not actually ready to move forward at this time. So I do recommend that you continue those to the July 24th meeting after the public hearing, and also provide any comments you have on the changes to the text, or anything that you've noticed that you would like to change to the tables, although I know those weren't included in your packet. But if you remember anything.
Before we open the public hearing, are there any comments or questions for staff regarding this?
I had one. On the one that the very first one when you talked about, let me go to the section here. It's Section E, structure and installation. You have vandal covers. Locked vandal-proof covers are required for all changeable copy signs to prevent unauthorized rearrangement or theft of changeable copy. Does that also apply to the, what do you call those marquee ones that are up in the air? Because they are considered a changeable copy.
That's something we can add in to clarify that it's for,
Like ground-mounted?
because we do have those separated out in the definitions.
That's what I thought.
Go ahead and add marquee signs as well.
But that'd be kind of hard to open up a cabinet when you're 12 or 13 feet in the air and try to put all those things on there.
So are you saying you want vandal covers for?
Well, no, I didn't see any distinction between them, and I just noticed that, where is it in the definitions, that you consider that the changeable copy sign, but are you saying that you want lockable covers on those as well, the ones that are on a marquee, like up above a theater?
It would be cleaner if you differentiated between the two, whether it's on the ground or in the air.
The changeable copy signs within so many feet of the ground, or?
Something to that effect. I mean, I would say ground-mounted type ones. I mean, I know in our church we have one of those, so I can see where that would definitely come into play. Is not, but I just wanted to find out if you guys intended to lock the marquee ones, the ones that are up in the air as well, if that was the intent or not.
This was added in per a comment from someone on the sign code review committee.
Okay.
So I'm not sure specifically what their intent was. It seemed like a good suggestion, so we added that in, but I hadn't thought about it from that perspective.
Okay. Just a little bit of a clarification between those two, if that's what you guys intended. If it is, so be it, but I think it would be rather difficult for somebody that's on a ladder or something like that to open up a cabinet and try to change a marquee sign if they're that high in the air.
Well, that also would affect all gas stations and everything as well up in the air, and you don't want to have to unlock a cabinet to do that. You want to just go change the numbers out.
Yeah, I never thought about the gas pump ones, but you're right.
We'll provide some clarification there.
Okay. Thank you.
Other comments before we open the public hearing?
Under the prohibited signs, item N, window signs, does that capture the window wraps, where the entire window is basically covered in a sign?
The window wraps would be considered, because they have to be mounted on the outside of the window or attached, that would be one of the exterior side of the window signs. So that would be something that would only then be allowed if an exception is granted due to the physical characteristics of the sign and the method for attaching it. So potentially an exception could be granted for that type, but again, it would be up to the discretion of the community development director as to whether it met the intent of the code.
What physical characteristics would be permissible where that would make sense to allow it?
Well, one of the signs like you were describing with the window wrap, because of the way that they work where you can see out but you can't see in, my understanding is they have to be applied to the outside of the window. So that would be one where the physical characteristics would prevent it from being attached on the inside.
Okay.
Any other comments? Not at this time. We would like to open the public hearing regarding amendments to Chapter 18, Period 170, signs. If there are no public comments, I believe staff has recommended that we continue this to the July 24th meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we continue amendments to Chapter 18.170 signs to the July 24th, 2012 Planning Commission meeting.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Copeland and seconded by Commissioner Roberts that we continue the public hearing for Chapter 18, Period 170 signs to the July 24th meeting. Is there any discussion? Not all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Our next item is conduct a public hearing for the amendments to Title 18 pertaining to landscaping. Staff presentation.
We're waiting for the presentation. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Tonight in your packets you had two documents before you. You had one that was titled Chapter 18.165 Landscaping, and then in support of that was the draft landscape design standards. The landscape design standards that you have in there are the result of several months of review. You've had those before you several times before since January of this year. The last month and a half, we've been working diligently to take that, since we got your comments on it, and try to convert that into an ordinance amendment. And that's what the 18.165 today is in front of you, is that amendment process. It's essentially a recodification of that whole section of code, with the idea that there was enough changes and enough rewriting that it was better to clean it up, clean the section numbering up, and get it all prepared right, even though there are elements of this text that are the same as what's been there before. So we didn't change every word in there, but because of what we were doing with the section organization and things like that, it was important for us to go ahead and recodify this chapter. What I'm going to do for you tonight is just run you quickly. Whoops. If I can hit the right button here. Okay. Did we miss some slides, though? You know what's going on. Those slides are hidden. Sorry about that. The slides in between that one and the recommendation slide are hidden. I remember the X on there while we were developing it. Sorry about this. What I'm going to do for you tonight is just kind of go quickly through each section, give you a rough overview of what's in there, some of the highlights. I'm not going to hit every point because it would take too long, but at least get you the highlights of where the changes are made and things like that.
Are there any questions while we're waiting on the slideshow?
You think we're ready? We are. It's not fancy, but it's there. What I want to do is just highlight real quickly. The intent here is to make sure that these coordinate again with the design standards themselves. So there's several bullet points that are in the purpose and intent statement at the beginning of this chapter. One is what we want these things to do is help us with the visual and aesthetic enhancement of the community, improve environmental conditions. Those are things like dealing with large areas of pavement or large buildings that tend to be heat sources, so using trees and other plant materials to help improve the environmental condition there. Plant diversity, we want to encourage that plant diversity, but also encourage the use of hardy species and species that will thrive during drought times and things like that. Provide buffers, and we'll talk about the buffers, especially in transitions from commercial or industrial property to residential property. It's a highly critical element of the landscape design elements. And then working in concert with the design standards, like we said. The first few sections of this, if we were to look at 18.165.010 all the way through .060, is really about expectations. These are things that we expect people to do as part of either bringing in their landscape plan or just meeting basic requirements. So there's a purpose and intent statement in the first section of this chapter. Then we have things that are general conditions and plan requirements, which are typical of what you see anywhere. Anytime there's a submittal made, you have those guidelines. Those guidelines really didn't change from the previous code. Those guidelines have stayed intact. Then there is a requirement of an occupancy permit in the sense that the landscape plan must be completed before an occupancy permit would be issued for the property. That is a current standard that the City of Gardner has. It's not a new standard, but we've placed it in there in an area of prominence so people understand that. Staff still works with the developers or the property owners at times because there's seasonal adjustments that need to be made. Sometimes a building is ready to come online, but you're outside of a planting season. Well, you don't want to be planting things that are going to die within 2 weeks and then have to have those replanted. So they will issue temporary certificates of occupancy or occupancy permits to allow that temporary occupation of the building, and then the idea is by the next period of the planting season, those things would be in place and ready to go, and then the final occupancy permit would be issued. Then we address maintenance. We also address exceptions, and there are places where We know that you've got to have exceptions in order for a property to work. The land framework here in the downtown area of Gardner is very different than the land framework out on the highway, you know, closer to the interchanges. So some of the landscape requirements may not fit perfectly in these property formats, so you have to be ready to grant those kinds of exceptions. And then finally, plant sizes. Just to give you a rough idea, in the next set of sections, .070 through .100, are really the list of requirements. So when we look at those sections, we're talking about specific requirements that will be put into place as a result of this ordinance or this amendment process. A couple things just to mention. What we looked at when we looked at number and locations, we really divided the sites up into 3 areas. So when we look at a property, we look at the street frontage, we then look at the internal site, and then we look at what's called the property perimeter. And the property perimeter is really that portion of the property that abuts other properties. So if you can think of, you have a basic rectangular property, within that you have a building envelope, and around that is the perimeter. Well, the perimeter is either a street frontage or it is that abuts the adjoining properties. So that's how we broke the sites up to look at this. In regard to street frontage, we've kept the requirement as it is today at 1 tree per 40 linear feet of street frontage. That's a current requirement that's out there. There's no change to that element of it. So every property that develops will have that requirement for trees. On the internal site, we've broken it out in 2 ways. We've looked at residential properties different than we have office, commercial, and industrial properties. For residential properties, we are talking about a requirement of 1 tree plus 3 shrubs or evergreens per dwelling unit. So that's a minimum requirement. Many times residential developers may provide more than that, or they'll have homeowners association rules that may have more than that, but the city's minimum requirement through this amendment would say 1 tree and 3 shrubs or 3 evergreens, either way. For office, commercial, and industrial, done a little bit differently. Instead of using the dwelling unit as the measuring piece, it's the square footage of the total property, not the square footage of the building, but of the total property. So in the Walmart situation out here where it's 29 acres, the calculation for requirements would be based on that total acreage. We don't worry about how much of it's in the building footprint, how much of it's in the parking area. It's just the overall acreage. The requirement there is 1 tree per 10,000 square feet of total property and 1 shrub or evergreen per 5,000 square feet of total property. It's a little bit different calculation. Previously, the code actually required 1 per 3,000, I believe, in office and commercial settings. And that was a little different because the calculation was made different. Because we're using the total property area, we've increased that square footage. This makes for an easier calculation. It's easier to get the plan, see the total square footage of the site, divided by 10 or 5, you've got the calculation. It's pretty simple to use and employ. Then on the property perimeter, we've incorporated several tables, and I might turn your attention to page 5 of the amendment that's in your packet. There's 2 tables there. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time in there, but what we've done is we've looked at the property perimeter and taken into account how different land uses transition from one to the other. So there's 4 intensity levels based on the type of uses, and they're basically 2 different residential intensities. One is more of the agricultural, rural estates, R1 single family densities. Then you get into the apartment densities as intensity 2. Then there's a commercial level, which is intensity level 3. And in industrial, which is intensity level 4. The requirements for perimeter landscaping are based on how the property transitions. So the most intense requirement would be if you were in an industrial property, that's where your development is, you were developing that, and adjacent to it you had residential, that's when the most intense requirement occurs for placing landscaping along that perimeter. So that enhances the buffer between those 2 uses. When it's commercial to commercial, there is no transition, so we don't worry about that requirement. When it's commercial to residential, there would be a requirement, but it's not as intense as an industrial to a residential. So that's the intent of those 2 tables, is to try to find a balance there, because we're always concerned about the impacts on adjacent properties, and landscaping can help us with that transition. Also, that landscaping can be used in combination with fencing, walls, berms, those kinds of things. For parking in vehicular areas, then, we also have looked at it the same way. We have perimeter requirements in the code, and we also have interior area requirements. On a perimeter requirement, we're requiring a 5-foot area for landscape area around a parking lot. Within that, you can use berms, you can use walls, you can use fences, whatever's appropriate, plus the plant materials. So that all works. So you have various treatments that can go on. We want to leave that design flexibility up to the developer and their designers. The only thing that's really required is the idea that you have pedestrian openings. So you can't create this solid wall along Main Street and not necessarily have a pedestrian opening from the sidewalk to the business. Okay? So that's one of the things that we try to look for and require there. On the interior parking area, we're requiring 6.5% landscape area. If I remember right, Amy, help me here, I think that's equivalent to what's there today.
I believe it's 6% right now.
Okay, so we
but
went
it's
up a little bit.
not based on the actual percentage, it's based on a calculation.
Right, and what we're doing is using the actual percentage. So we made a little bit of a different adjustment. And then what we talked about is instead of having large parking areas, in here we're recommending that you have parking blocks of 40 spaces, no more than that. So you have to incorporate some type of landscape feature, whether it's an island, a median, some type of peninsula, whatever, with the idea that you're creating blocks of 40 spaces or less in these large areas. How you do that, that's up to the designer, and then working with the staff, trying to come to a resolution to make sure that everything will be in working order, both from the functioning of the parking lot, but also from the idea that the plants will survive in those environments. So we're not saying you have to have a certain number of islands, we're not saying you have to have a certain number of landscape areas. That design is left alone. Go
I have a
ahead.
quick question. On the parking blocks, the 40 or less, is that a double loaded parking?
It could be double loaded if
Or is
you
that
wanted
one
to.
long
It can be,
stretch?
no, you can't have more than, what was the linear distance on that? We had a linear distance limitation
Okay.
on it, so it cannot just be 40 straight single loaded
Okay. Yeah.
parking spaces.
Okay.
So I think when we looked at that, and that's what I was just going to look at here to see if I see it, we have 180 feet is the basic minimum or maximum amount of linear distance that you can go ahead and have that without a landscape feature breaking it up.
Okay.
Okay? So I think that's about 20 spaces, 9 foot wide.
Yeah.
So that was the intent on that.
Okay.
So you'd have 20, you could have a double loaded 20 and 20 to create your parking block. You could do that. You could do 20 single with a peninsula and then 20 more, and go that way on a single loaded, so you have that ability too. Then the other area that we did look at for commercial properties in particular was the idea of landscaping along building facades. And we made a differentiation between viewable facades and non-viewable facades. Anything that was viewable from the public, whether you're on the property or you're off of the property in a public right-of-way, needs to address landscaping on that facade. If it's a service area that's designated not for public use, so the backside of a strip center, the backside of an industrial area, or even in some cases a warehousing distribution section where there's an element of that design that is not viewable to the public and is not intended for use by the public, you would not have to worry about building facade landscaping. You'd leave that alone, okay? So that's why we made that differentiation there. The building facade landscaping, we're also defining as you have to incorporate trees or shrubs or evergreens or perennials. You can't just simply have a stretch of turf and call that a landscape area in front of the building. So you have to have some kind of plant material in there besides the turf. And this also applies then to facades that are greater, or 20 feet or greater in length. And what we tried to do with the 20 foot was take a look at some of the elements in these smaller formats downtown, because you do have buildings that have small facades, and we want to make sure that they're addressed. Now that doesn't mean you have to have a tree in front of a business. It just means you have to have some type of landscape area that's equal to about 25% of that linear distance. It could be shrubbery, you could use barberries, you could use any number of things there. So that's the limitation on that. And then we also made some adjustments. I know a couple months ago there was some discussion about the widths of these different planter boxes and things. And so when we use trees, we're using a 10-foot wide measurement at 100 square feet as a minimum for a tree well or a tree planting. If you have something less than that, you can go down to the 5-foot level. So we've kind of adjusted for those comments.
The final item in this section is then the screening, and really we address trash bins and service areas, ground and wall-mounted equipment, and then the land use buffer. Like I said, intentionally here, though, with the land use buffer, we've really called out when we go from a commercial, an intense commercial zoning district or an industrial district to residential, that's when the requirement for fencing and things come into place. So we wanted to call that out specifically, make sure that's in there, because we don't want people thinking they can put 20 shade trees in and call that buffer good enough between a residential property and an industrial property. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm open for other questions. The staff is recommending that you conduct the public hearing and then forward this item to the City Council with a recommendation of approval.
Question back to the parking. You talked about 40 parking spaces. How would that affect our current Walmart if, let's say, another plan that came in similar to that?
It would impact it quite a bit, actually, because where you have some very long linear distances, so it would break up those aisles every 20 or so spaces, because again, you can only have that 180 feet before you'd have to have a landscape break in there. So that would be a very different scenario. But what would really predicate that is the requirement for how much landscaping they would need in the interior site. So when you did the calculation of how many trees and shrubs and things like that they'd need to provide, they're going to have to provide some greater landscaping in order to do that and make that work. Now, Walmart's in a strange situation. We did some calculations, and that caused us to change some numbers at the last minute that we presented tonight, because they also are adjacent to the residential, the mobile home park, to the west that's sitting there. That residential use kicks in a perimeter requirement that's even greater. So when you start playing with that, the tree numbers, the shrub numbers were going pretty high for that acreage. So that's why we adjusted square footages in that. So we're trying to find a balance between the requirement on the site and offering enough opportunities to put that in there and then meeting your parking requirements at the same time.
Let's think of another item like Austin's parking lot or the Moonlight Commons, which right now behind it is we have a plan in place. Would they have to go back and revisit that parking lot? Because I would imagine that there's easily more than 40 parking spots in one spot.
You're going to have to tell me what the status of the plan is.
Well, I'm trying to determine which plan you're referring to.
Moonlight Commons, where Austin is, behind it, another one. I'm trying to think of some huge parking areas and how that would be affected.
I don't remember that plan very specifically, so I'm not sure from a parking standpoint how that particular one would be affected. I did look at, we looked at a couple of different smaller sites. One of the ones I looked at was Burger King and how that would affect their parking or their landscaping requirements. And so obviously their parking lot was small enough, it wasn't impacted by the parking lot aspect of that, but as far as the perimeter and the street frontage tree requirements and the additional site trees, looking at that, that's one of the reasons we started to play with those numbers and come up with some different ones.
Yeah, we used, I think you looked at Burger King, I looked at a Phillips Conoco station out here. We tried to see what the difference was between a small site and a large site, and Walmart was probably the worst case scenario that we found, just in that scenario, because you had almost 30 acres of property. So when you started adding those numbers up, I think at one point we were up above 350 trees being required on that site. And so that's why we took the square footage numbers and boosted them up to that 10,000 and 5,000 level, was to reduce that impact a little bit.
I think what maybe he was getting at is any of the plans that are out there now that we possibly have approved, does this affect, do they have to come back and meet this?
I see.
Second part.
If there is an approved plan in place, they would be grandfathered in. However, if the plan expired and they had to come back in, obviously they would be subject to the new requirements.
Okay.
A preliminary development plan, because a lot of times we don't look at the landscaping until the final, we would probably have to look at that and see what made the most sense as far as the final.
Probably work with the property owner and the designer on that, because they may have made some already made decisions on the purchase of the property and things on making a site work and fit. So you
because the preliminary development plan will never expire, and so if, for example, the new landscaping requirements would cause drastic changes to the plan, naturally, we wouldn't make them subject to those new requirements, but we would probably try to encourage them with the final development plan to come closer to the new requirements.
And I'm kind of thinking through some of our bigger parking lots and such in town. A lot of them would be schools, those type of areas.
And the requirements would apply to those as well, institutions, things like that would all still have to meet requirements.
So if we have non-conforming parking lots and they decide to go through and repave their parking lot or something to that degree, would we make them comply
I
or
think
not?
the trigger would probably be a permit situation more than anything else, depending on what they, if they come in with a certain level of improvements.
Yeah, I mean, repaving a parking lot would be a maintenance issue.
Okay.
If we're looking at a new site plan for a redesign of the parking lot that's significant, then that would be what would trigger that. But if they're just making minor adjustments to the layout of the parking lot, that probably would not trigger a site plan and therefore wouldn't trigger the requirements.
So if they're adding parking spaces, basically, that probably would trigger it more than likely.
Or,
This would, the non-conforming uses section would apply.
Okay.
So this goes back just like everything else. If they're making significant changes, then the new requirements kick in. Otherwise, they would not.
I think if they took a property and they reconfigured their out parcels, for instance, or if they didn't have out parcels and they wanted them, now you're talking about a whole new layout and format for the development, then you'd probably be looking at them going through this process.
Because I'm thinking more along the lines of Price Chopper parking lot and all those change, and all the, because they still got, what, one lot out there left? Maybe two,
Yeah.
still, but I knew at one point he was going to do something with the parking lot, and I didn't know if that would fall under this purview or not.
Generally, under the non-conforming uses regulations, change to the parking lot layout will not be considered a significant change. The exception to that is if they are making significant impacts to the circulation and it would affect the traffic outside the boundaries of the property, that would definitely then trigger it.
Okay.
Other questions at this time for staff? Thank you. At this time, we will open the public hearing regarding this application, Title 18 pertaining to landscaping. Is there any members of the public that wish to speak in regards to this application? Or it would actually be for the amendments to Chapter 18, Period 165.
Mr. Chair, I move that we close the public hearing.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Manley and seconded by Commissioner Copeland to close the public hearing. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Questions, comments, concerns? I am a little bit concerned if we get any big centers or anything in the future, what that would do to them, having 40 parking spots is basically 20 in a row. And we have at least 3 or 4 other areas within the city currently that have parking lots at least that long or longer.
Yeah, but I think that's part of what we're wanting to try to change. I mean, I know that the parking lot islands, they break up that big expanse of asphalt. And I think it also deters. If we would have had those in the Walmart parking lot, you really probably wouldn't be able to get the trucks to park in there anymore. I mean, that's just one of the things I think that inevitably, I think that's what they try to deter. But I understand where you're coming from, that we have places that are already going to be that way, but I think moving forward in the future, I think it's a little bit better. I like the parking lot broken up a little bit more, so it's not such a large span. Plus, putting trees in the middle helps reduce some of the heat island effect when you get all that asphalt out there and the sun beats down on it and it starts heating everything up. So,
I guess what I'm afraid of is what we will see and what we've seen in other places, it's an island of rocks. And there's no landscaping, no grass. You might have some beat up plastic laid down and then rocks and dirt.
And there is a requirement written into the regulations that would prevent that from happening. They do have to have actual landscape material growing in the islands. It can't just be rock.
Because we do have that several places throughout town.
That's correct. That was one of the things we discussed.
The one other item I'll bring up is in the exceptions section, there is the ability, because this would come through as either a preliminary plan or a final plan, the planning commission would have the ability to grant exceptions to some of these specifics. So if you had a site where you have those concerns and you look at the overall design and the overall design is exceptional or looks really good that they're meeting the principles and the guidelines of the landscape design standards, you have the ability to grant exceptions on those things. So there is that flexibility built in for you.
And I'm thinking about a place where you could put 24 or 26. I mean, why is the magic number 20?
Mainly it just had to do with when we looked at the width of parking spaces and, you know, they're 9 feet each, so it was a multiple of 9, and we were trying to figure out, okay, what makes sense in there. There's no science, so it's one of those things of what from a design standpoint looks right. Obviously, if you have a property format that it gives you some strange number in there, that's an easy one to sit there and say, you know, because of the physical characteristics, we've granted an exception to that, so.
Other comments, questions? Are we ready to move forward on this item?
We are. Mr. Chair, I move that we forward amendments to Title 18 pertaining to landscaping to City Council with a recommendation of approval.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Manley and seconded by Commissioner Pop to forward amendments to Chapter 18, Period 165, Landscaping to the City Council with a recommendation of approval. Is there any discussion? Not all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carried. And our final item this evening on our old business is amendments to Title 18 pertaining to definitions related to outdoor storage.
And there's not a formal presentation for this item either. This is one that we've continued once or twice now, and we're looking primarily at definitions for outdoor storage originally. What we're recommending is broadening that so that we can put the landscaping design definitions in there as well. Just amend that chapter one time instead of 3 separate times. So what we're looking at is continuing this, and then we'll go ahead and advertise for the public hearing for definitions in general, which actually that's a little bit broader than that later on your agenda, so that we can look at all of that at once.
So at this time, we will open the public hearing regarding amendments to Title 18 pertaining to definitions related to outdoor storage. Is there anybody from the public who would wish to speak on this item? If not, I believe staff recommends that we continue this item as well.
Mr. Chair, I move that we go ahead and continue amendments to Title 18 pertaining to the definition of related outdoor storage to the July 24th Planning Commission meeting.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Pop and seconded by Commissioner Manley to continue the public hearing to the July 24th hearing, or to July 24th Planning Commission meeting. Is there any discussion? Not all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. This item is also continued to our next meeting. At this time, I am going to turn the meeting over to Commissioner Pop, due to I have a family member that is employed by Marvin's Tow Service.
Wow.
Sorry, I did not realize that Commissioner Godwin would be absent today, so
That's okay.
I didn't give you the heads up. All right. This item, just go through very briefly. It's not letting me change. There we go. All Right, the existing zoning, this was just recently rezoned by the City Council, ordinance 2396 to C3 Commercial District. And actually, I guess that's all I had. So, the applicant has agreed to revise the plans per recommendations from staff, but they did not have those ready in time to give to you. So since you had nothing to review, we had no choice but to recommend that you continue this item to the July 24th meeting. So, looks like another
Open and continue.
one of those meetings.
At this time, I'd like to go ahead and open the public hearing on CUP 1203. Are there any comments from the public? Seeing none, I think we need a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move that we continue the public hearing of CUP 1203 Marvin's Tow Service to the July 24th, 2012 Commission meeting.
Second.
It has been moved by Commissioner Manley and seconded by Commissioner Copeland to go ahead and continue the public hearing to the July 24th meeting. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carried. I'll go ahead and turn the meeting back over to our chair at this time.
At this time, we would like to conduct a public hearing to consider a conditional use permit for storage, collection of donated items at 408 East Main Street. The application is filed by Recycle with Integrity, a division of Integrity Communications. Staff presentation, please.
Okay, this request is to allow storage, or in this case, it's the collection of donated items in a C2 General Business District. The property is located at 408 East Main Street, which is in the Midtown District identified by the Main Street Corridor Plan, and it's also identified for commercial uses by the Development Plan map. It's approximately a third of an acre site with a 2,600 square foot building that was constructed around 1985. The property is outlined in green on your screen, as I mentioned, Zone C2. And the aerial view of the site, you can see the current development there. Integrity Communications has recycled cell phones at this location as part of its business in the past. It's an accessory. All business activities have been conducted inside the building. Recently, though, electronics and consumer goods have started to be accepted for recycling and repurposing. A 16-foot trailer was located on the site to store those items prior to shipping off-site. And the recycling repurposing activity occurs during the normal business hours, which are 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, or on an appointment basis. Recycling is not allowed by right in C2 district, and it's not specifically addressed by the zoning regulations, except with regards to salvage yards, which this is not a typical salvage yard. The activity more closely resembles storage warehousing use, which is a conditional use in the C2 district. You may recall that this is the same way that we addressed Marked Industries by conditional use permit a couple of years ago. Staff does recommend approval with the stipulations on your screen. Are there any questions for staff?
Yeah, the only thing I noted was on stipulation A, was the way the wording is no drop-off activity shall be conducted outside of the business hours of 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, or by appointment. Should that or be replaced with,
Unless.
yes.
Okay.
That could be a change we make if we act on this item.
Anything else for staff? I believe the applicant is present as well.
Does the applicant have a presentation this evening, or would like to say anything on behalf of this application?
I really don't. process like this, I've submitted what has been requested. I trust that was adequate. If there are questions of me, I'm available.
At this time, we will open the public hearing for CUP 12-04, Recycle with Integrity. Anybody from the public wish to speak regarding this application? Sir, if you could please come to the microphone. Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Ed Moore. I represent EMI Investments, which owns property right across the street from the said property. The gentleman's always kept his place up. I think it'd do the community a lot of good to grant this to him.
Mr. Moore, can I get your address, please?
I own property through 413 East Main, through 415 East Main, and on Mulberry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other members of the public that would like to speak regarding this application? If not, I believe a motion is in order to close the public hearing.
Mr. Chair, I move that we close the public hearing.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Manley and seconded by Commissioner Pop that we close the public hearing. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. This time, the public hearing is now closed. Questions, comments? Are we ready to act on this? I guess I had a few questions. Was there anything stipulated on where the trailer could be parked? Or just anywhere on the property?
So it'll be parked along the east side of the building in a manner that does not block any parking spaces or driveways.
Okay, so with that, right now it's parked right next to the building. Could it be parked back by the shed or back in that area behind or closer to the back of the property? Still on the east side. And I guess that'd be a question for the applicant if you would like to.
I can park it wherever you would like me to park it. The best location I feel for it is right where it's at right now. If I need to park it as you suggested, I can do that.
Mr. Chair, when I visited the site, gosh, it was last week or so, when I visited there, one of the things that was noticed was that there is parking that's occurring along other portions of the east side of that building at the back right now. So I don't know how that would impact his parking calculations or his parking needs for that site. So that was why we kind of worded that stipulation the way we did, was the idea that at least there was no parking really occurring at that point. So, but the way this is worded, could he move it there? Yes, he could.
Okay.
So.
My greatest challenge, if I moved it there, would be is when I need to move the trailer to my downstream partners for the items that I do not recycle internally in my building. If there are individuals parked in the business just east of me, it may be a little difficult for me to maneuver in or out. So, but it's workable.
That was just one of the questions. When you're coming from the west side down Main Street, you can't see it at all as it's back. When you're going from the east side, you see a big red trailer sitting there, and that was my only concern. So, not something that I feel real strong about doing another stipulation or anything, just something that I saw, and maybe even on the weekends if it could be back there if there's not traffic. I'm not sure how much you move it or anything like that. So those were some of my questions and concerns.
I really don't move it until it's full, but it could be moved on the weekends too. I own some property south of town here that could be moved any weekend. I think it'd be more visible during the week than on the weekend.
Sorry, could you come up to the microphone and state your name and address for the record?
My name is Johnny Craig, and I am the owner of Integrity Communications and Recycle with Integrity.
And the address of the property, sir?
408 East Main Street.
408?
Right. And we've actually been recycling cell phones for the past 8 years. I had no idea that we weren't zoned correctly, and that's all right. I want to be right with the city. We're now, as has been stated, recycling electronics for corporations. We have partners throughout the United States that their donor-based collect devices and ship them to us from all over the country. And what we do with those proceeds is they go back to help non-for-profits like Food for the Poor, Wycliffe Bible Translators, Gospel for Asia, Serve India. And we're not even soliciting these opportunities, they just keep coming to us. So that's our goal, that's our objective. Anything else?
Not at this time, thank you. Questions, comments? My only concern is starting to have storage units at each business. I know that we have to look at it from a case-per-case basis. So that's my only concern as you go down Main Street. Obviously, the items and the business that they're working in with recycling, that's definitely something that we want in our community. Just want to make sure and share my concern regarding those.
Mr. Chair, I move that we, forward, CUP 12-04, to the City Council with a recommendation for approval, subject to stipulations A through H, and modifying stipulation A, changing the word "or" to "unless."
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we forward conditional use permit 12-04 as stated by Commissioner Copeland and seconded by Commissioner Manley. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Our next item is, can we do 3 and 4 together?
Yes.
Okay. 3 and 4 we will do continuous. SP 12-04, Sprayer Specialties, consider a site plan for Sprayer Specialties, a retail business selling agriculture equipment located on the north side of 191st Street, 3/8 of a mile west of Gardner Road. Application is filed by Trek LLC with engineering services provided by Allen Brand Drews Incorporated. And depending on the outcome of SP 12-04, we will review FP 12-02, which is the final plat for a 2-lot, 5.35 acre commercial development located on the north side of 191st Street, 3/8 of a mile west of Gardner Road. Application is also filed by Trek LLC with engineering services provided by Allen Brand Drews Incorporated.
Mr. Chair, I need to put on the record that I used to work for the designer for this project. So, I don't know if I abstain. Will we have a quorum still?
Yes, we still have a
Okay.
quorum.
I'm gonna go ahead.
Cannot make any motions.
I'm going to go ahead and abstain from this one.
Because we still have 4 of the 7 present, and it'd be the same as what we had earlier.
Correct. Okay.
Staff report.
All right. This property, which is outlined in yellow on your screen, is zoned C2 General Business